NASCAR has filed the summary judgment motion against 2311 and Spire Motorsports, and many teams come in support of the charter system and want a settlement. And Kyle Busch speaks about his new potential crew chief for 2026 and also his future as well. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and Motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at paint schemes. We've only got one paint scheme to take a look at today, and it's Ryan Preece's 2025 Crumble scheme that we'll see this weekend at Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Honestly, I like the look of this car. I like the pink look to it. I like the logos they have on it. There's some good sponsorship placement on this one. I think it's very solid. There's some good looks to it for sure. I like it quite a bit. Looking forward to on the racetrack this weekend at Las Vegas. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carson Hocevar. Now, we'll talk about the lawsuit here in just a minute, but while that was going on, you had Carson Hocevar, I believe, announced on Twitter, I think it was on Friday night, that he may have actually bought a Chili's in Portage, Michigan. It's not been completely verified at this point if he has officially bought that Chili's, but if Carson has bought the Chili's, it makes a lot of sense. Carson Hocevar, of course, is sponsored by Chili's. Chili's is associated with Spire Motorsports Group, and of course the group that he's associated with, Gamebridge, as well. But I think it's pretty cool that if he actually has bought a Chili's, we've seen drivers invest in other companies before. We've seen drivers in NASCAR also invest in restaurants before. So I think it's pretty cool if it's actually happened. I love to see this for sure. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing story for the sport if a Chili's hasn't bought by Carson Hocevar, and keeping it around in this country and keeping as many Chili's around is good. Pretty incredible that Carson Hocevar has likely bought a Chili's. I think that's pretty good, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Junior Motorsports. As was reported by the NASCAR Insights accounts on Saturday, that Junior Motorsports swept the top 5 in qualifying for the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at the Charlotte Roval. This is the first time in NASCAR Xfinity Series history that a single team has swept the top 5 in qualifying. Yes, we know Connor Zolcic has been dominant on road courses so far this year, but the Junior Motorsports road course program in general this season has been phenomenal. And not just that, the satellite team Hendrick Motorsports was 6th in qualifying. So technically you could say that Hendrick and Junior Motorsports were 1st or 6th in qualifying. It's just incredible to see how dominant they've been on road courses so far in 2025, and I expect that to continue going into next year, with those likely to run a lot of road course races in 2026 as well in Xfinity. So I think it's pretty impressive. Congratulations to Junior Motorsports on sweeping the top 5 in qualifying and doing impressive in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race as well. Really good stuff, in my opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Leah Block. Now, if you watched the F1 Academy race, you saw history for Leah Block as she basically won after having a reverse grid starting on the pole. She won her first ever F1 Academy race this weekend at Singapore. This is a really, really big deal. Leah Block, who is the daughter of the late Ken Block. Leah has been having some really good runs in the F1 Academy this year. I think she's had a couple podiums so far this season. But for her, she has absolutely done an amazing job this year at points, and she's gotten better as a race car driver at this as well. I think that Ken will be really, really proud of her, and I think it's awesome to see her go to victory lane and pick up the win. Congratulations to Leah on picking up the win in the F1 Academy race. A well-earned and well-deserved victory. You could tell by how the Williams people were reacting, how happy they were for her. Congratulations to her on picking up the win. I'd love to see her go to like Formula 4, Formula 3 in the future, see what she could do in the next year or so. But once again, congratulations to her on picking up the win and victory. Good to see her go out there and win the F1 Academy race, a well-earned and well-deserved victory in that event. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Brendan Butterbean Queen. Right before the green flag dropped for the ARCA race, it was confirmed that Butterbean would, because he started the race, was your 2025 ARCA champion. He came in the race, I believe, being up by like 50 or 52 points or something like that going into the race. And with him starting the race, he is the ARCA champion. Congratulations to Brendan Butterbean Queen. Brendan absolutely earned the championship this year. He's won like 7 or 8 ARCA races so far this year. He's not only that, but he's been one of the more consistent guys so far in ARCA. Obviously, there's a lot of talk he's going to move up to the Craftsman Truck Series next year, but for him, it's a phenomenal accomplishment. Congratulations to him on winning the ARCA championship this year. He's been, again, I think he's done a phenomenal job in that car so far, showing consistent pace and speed, and I think he earned it, and I'm excited to see what he can do in 2026, because I do expect that he is going to be really good once again next year. in the Truck Series. Again, there's rumors he's going to go to Collie. Congratulations to him on winning the ARCA Championship, a well-earned and well-deserved win, and a well-earned and deserved championship in ARCA with 7 or 8 wins in the 2025 year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Singapore Grand Prix. Right before the NASCAR Cup Series race took place at the Charlotte Roval, you had the Formula One race at Singapore. There'd be a little bit of contact early in the race between Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, where Lando got some damage on the left front wing, I'm pretty sure, and Oscar faded back quite a bit. But that was really the only drama that took place in this race. Once George Russell got the race lead, he would completely dominate this event. He would pretty much lead almost every single lap of the race. The only time he lost lead was when he came down pit road. And once everyone had cycled in and come down pit road, he would have the race lead over Max Verstappen. There'd be a decent battle between Verstappen and Lando Norris for second position. But outside of that, not much happened behind George Russell. He would come off the final corner and pick up a well-earned and well-dominant win. I believe that is George's 6th career Formula One win and his second win of the 2025 season. The other one coming at the Canadian Grand Prix at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve racetrack. Congratulations to George on picking up the win and victory. He earned this one. Dominance race. The most deserving driver picked up the win, and that's the most important thing. Congratulations to him on picking up the win in the Singapore Grand Prix. He did a fantastic and really, really good job in this race. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Green. Now, Austin Green, of course, was competing in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at the Charlotte Roval and had a phenomenal and really good run in this race as he would finish runner-up to Connor Zilch and score a second-place finish at the Charlotte Roval. A lot of people have been talking about how good Austin Green has been on the road courses so far over the last year or so, and I completely agree. He has ran 19 NASCAR Xfinity Series races so far this year, and he has scored 8 top 10 finishes, and I think even like 2 or 3 top 5 so far in 2025 and 24 as well. And all those have come at road courses, including the fact he's also won an ARCA race so far at Charlotte earlier this year. Austin Green, in my opinion, is really, really talented. And I get people saying he hasn't been phenomenal at the Oval so far this year. But if you give him a good top-level car, he could absolutely be a championship threat. I think, especially how many road courses there are in Xfinity, I think you have to give this guy a chance and opportunity to be full-time because he's done such a good job. It's a shame it took a long time for the broadcast to interview him. It took him 30 minutes to interview him after the race. But I think it's just impressive to see what Austin Green has done so far on road courses. I always look at him as a value pick to contend for a top 5 or even a top 10. But to finish second behind the best road course race in the field, I think that is phenomenal, and that is amazing to see. And I'm happy for him because he earned that position. He did a fantastic job, did an amazing, and I think he put on an incredible performance, yes, on Saturday. Congratulations on an amazing run. It's a shame he didn't go out there and pick up the win, but it was going to be really, really tough to beat Connor, especially how good Connor has been at the road courses this year. Congratulations, Austin, on doing a really awesome and really, really good job. Congrats him on picking up the win and victory at the Charlotte Roval. A well-earned and well-deserved victory. Not victory, but a well-deserved second place in the Xfinity event. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Connor Zilch. Now, Connor Zilch pretty much made history as Connor Zilch picked up his 10th win of the 2025 season in the NASCAR Xfinity Series race at the Charlotte Roval. He becomes the youngest driver, I believe, to win 11 races in NASCAR Xfinity competition. I could be wrong on that front, but he also becomes the first driver to have 10 wins in a single season in the NASCAR Xfinity Series since Kyle Busch all the way back to 2016. What Connor's been doing this year has been phenomenal. He's won a lot of different types of tracks. He's won a super speedway race. He's won 4 or 5 road course races. He's won an intermediates. He's won a short track so far this year. And he's had 17 consecutive top 5 finishes in a row. He has been having a generational run so far in the 2025 season. Feels very similar how dominant Jeff Gordon was in 1998. And Connor's doing this at 19. And I think that what he's been doing this year has been well-earned and well-deserved. Congratulations, Connor, on doing a fantastic and really good job in the Xfinity Series. Just putting on an incredible season. His 10th win of the year. No one should be overshadowing that. He did an amazing job. Put together a great performance. He pretty much dominated, leading 61 or 62 of the 68 laps. Amazing run for him. Congratulations to him on getting a great finish yesterday. Winning the race, not winning the race on Saturday. Dominating, winning it. Congratulations, Connor, on getting another win and victory. A well-earned win in the Xfinity race at the Roval. Looks to try to break the record. Looks to win the final 4 races of the year and win the most races in a single Xfinity season. The record is 13. Congrats to Connor, and we'll see if he can accomplish that at the end of the year. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kurt Busch. Now, many of you probably saw this on social media, but a lot of people were kind of wild to see this. But Kurt Busch actually did a burnout in a special event in a number 97 Chevrolet. Kurt Busch's number 97, of course, the most iconic number to Kurt Busch's career. He won the championship in the number 97 in 2004. And then, of course, he drove for Chip Ganassi, where he also had a ton of success in the number 1 car. So combining this up does make a lot of sense, but it's kind of weird seeing him in a Chevrolet, right, considering he works with Toyota. He, I believe, is still working with 2311 Racing in a pretty big way currently at the moment. So it's interesting to see. But I think for Kurt, it's good to see him back in a NASCAR Cup car, even if he's just doing a burnout. It would be pretty cool if Kurt could come out of retirement and just do a one-off. He's been medically cleared to go and do events. So if he would love to do it, I'd love to see him do like a one-off in the NASCAR Cup Series. Obviously, he's got to be, does he want to? I'm not sure at this point. But I think it's pretty cool that Kurt got the opportunity to do a burnout in a Cup Series car. An old Gen 6 car looked like to me. So I love seeing stuff like that. Events like that are pretty cool to see. Not congratulations, but pretty cool to see that Kurt got the opportunity to do a burnout in the number 97. I love seeing stuff like that. I think seeing cool events like that take place where he gets a chance and opportunity is pretty cool, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Vargas. As it was announced on Friday afternoon that Ryan Vargas will actually be joining Monster Jam in 2025. He'll be driving El Toro Loco in 2 upcoming Monster Jam events before the end of the 2025 season. We've seen people like Cannon Murphy, who have raced in NASCAR, go over and do Monster Jam. But Ryan Vargas, say what you want to say about his career on the NASCAR side of things, what he has been able to do and accomplish as a driver and all the things he's been able to do, not many drivers have done what Ryan has done. Not many have gone over and raced in Monster Jam. Not many have gone over and raced in NASCAR's top 2 or 3 divisions and then gone and run a NASCAR Euro Series race. Because he's going to, I believe, go run a couple NASCAR Euro Series races before the end of this season. And now he's getting the chance and opportunity to join Monster Jam for a couple races. And I get Monster Jam is so much different than racing in NASCAR, but I think having the opportunity to compete in Monster Jam, a lot of young kids dream about going over and doing Monster Jam stuff. Monster Jam is so cool, and I think that a lot of NASCAR fans are going to get the chance and opportunity and are going to want to tune into this because they see a NASCAR driver going in and competing in something like this. So I think this is pretty cool for sure to get the chance and opportunity to compete in Monster Jam. I think Ryan should be really excited about that. I know a lot of people in his camp are really excited about that as well. I love seeing stuff like that. I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing for motorsports in general that we can see the crossover and stuff like that happen. And I think it's pretty cool that Ryan is doing a lot of good things behind the scenes in the industry, working with sponsors and getting the opportunity to compete in a lot of things, competing in the NASCAR Canada Series this year as well, show some decent speed over there. And he's got a podium in the NASCAR Euro Series. So I love the fact that Ryan's getting the chance and opportunity to compete in Monster Jam and getting an opportunity to run the El Toro Loco in this year. Pretty exciting stuff, in my opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Corey Heim. Along with the fact that Connor Zilisch picked up his 10th win of 2025 in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, Corey Heim made history for himself as Corey Heim picked up his 10th win of the 2025 season at the Charlotte Roval. With him picking up his 10th win of the year, he has now won the most races in a single season in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. Coming into a race on Friday afternoon, basically the record was 9. Greg Biffle held that, but Corey Heim tied that at New Hampshire Motor Speedway. And now Corey Heim holds the record for most wins in a single season. Corey Heim has had a phenomenal year in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, but it's not just based off the fact that he's won 10 races. His consistency has been incredible. He's had like 16 or 17 top 5s and like 18 or 19 top 10s in 22 races. His average finish is a 5.5. He's just been amazing this season and has put together an incredible performance in that number 11 truck and continues to do amazing things this year. Very similar to something I mentioned with Connor Zilisch. If Corey Heim does not win the championship this year, it is going to feel like a robbed championship because Corey Heim has just been the best without question. He scored the most top 5s, more top 10s, most wins by a wide stretch of the imagination. And I think he's just been doing a phenomenal job in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series this year. And no one outside of maybe Lane Briggs has come really close to having those stats. So amazing run for him. Congratulations, Corey, on picking up the win. Again, he's just been doing so well this year in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series. He's been phenomenal this year, and I really hope he wins the championship. I worry about Phoenix, though, because he's won race championships. You can lose a championship really quickly. So for him, congratulations him on a win, a well-earned and well-deserved victory. Put together a phenomenal run. Good to see him go out there and pick up the win and the victory at the Charlotte Roval. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Shane Van Gisbergen. Now, we're going to talk about the controversial finish from the Charlotte Roval here in just a short little bit. But biggest thing to talk about is Shane Van Gisbergen picking up his 5th consecutive road course victory in the NASCAR Cup Series. On top of that as well, he is the first driver to win multiple races in a season since 1982 with 15-plus second margins. Remember, Shane Van Gisbergen, I believe, won at Mexico or another race by over 15 seconds. This is the second time he's done that. Bobby Allison was a driver who accomplished that back in 1982. And keep in mind, those were at ovals. What Shane Van Gisbergen has been doing this year on the road courses is phenomenal. He is only one win away from tying the record for most road course wins consecutively in a row. And that was Jeff Gordon, who did that from 1997 up until 2000. And I think it's very likely that he is going to accomplish this because I don't see anybody right now beating him. Now, he did have competition yesterday a little bit. He had competition of the likes like Christopher Bell and Kyle Larson throughout the day. But Shane Van Gisbergen has just been so good on the road courses. And I mentioned this yesterday in my review. If he gets these ovals figured out, you better watch out because I think he has a really good chance and a really strong possibility of getting good at these ovals. He's starting to figure it out. He was pretty fast in New Hampshire for that crash, and he finished in the top 10 in Kansas, and I expect him to only get better as time goes on. And he could be a threat to win the championship if he gets these ovals figured out. But right now, the main focus is on him winning the race at the Roval. Congratulations him on picking up the win. A well-earned and well-deserved victory. 5 consecutive road course wins is incredible. 5 wins this year. 6 career Cup Series wins. 10 National Touring wins with 4 spinning wins on top of the 6 he's had in Cup this year. So congratulations him on picking up. He did a fantastic, great job. Good to see him go out there, pick up the win and the victory in this event. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Rev Racing. Now, I believe it was reported by Joseph Strigley, and I think even a good friend of mine, Casey Campbell, as well, that Rev Racing has confirmed that they will likely not be returning in ARCA in 2026. We obviously knew that Venturini Motorsports will not be returning to ARCA next year. They're shutting down their program, and Nitro Motorsports will be merging with them going into next year. Billy Venturini working with them going into next season. But Rev Racing is not returning is definitely really disappointing news to hear. That means that 2 really competitive organizations, while not being as good as like Joe Gibbs Racing or Pinnacle Racing Group, losing a team like Rev Racing who's had a ton of success. We've seen drivers like Nick Sanchez go through the program and win championships. Of course, he won the championship, I believe, in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And then moving up to the Truck Series, having success over there, now racing Xfinity, getting his first career win at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and other drivers getting the opportunity, like Andres Perez, who won the championship last year. It is disappointing here that this team likely will not be back in ARCA in 2026. I'm very worried about the future for ARCA currently at the moment. I think there needs to be some work on the competitive side of things because you're losing 2 competitive teams. And granted, Nitro coming in, I think that they'll be competitive, so at least you'll have a competitive car coming in and replace it at that point. But the big question is, how many Nitro cars are there going to be next year? How many good cars are there going to be in ARCA next season? Because losing a team like Rev Racing, that's going to be really disappointing, and I think that's going to be sad for the sport to lose a team like Rev. Now, could Rev move up to the Craftsman Truck Series? That is possible, but I'm not sure at this point. And what does it mean for people like LeVar Scott? LeVar Scott, there's been rumors of him going to Call It Racing, but there's been nothing official at that point. Does a team like Alpha Prime take a chance on him going into next year in Xfinity? Does he move up to Trucks or Xfinity? Who knows at this point? But to hear the news that they're likely not going to be back in ARCA next year, that is really disappointing news to hear. I wish they were coming back, so I think they've earned the right to come back. They have been phenomenal over the years, winning races, having a ton of success. It's a shame to see they likely won't be back in the future, and it's sad news to hear they likely won't be back next year. I wish it wasn't happening, because I want to see a team like that continue to race and be in the sport, because they help development of drivers and people and pit crews, among other things. So it's sad to see more than likely that Rev Racing won't be around and will be shutting down their program likely at the end of the year and not be back in ARCA in 2026. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about ARCA once again. As it was announced on Saturday morning that the 2026 ARCA schedule has been officially announced and unveiled. So here's how the season is going to go. The season is going to kick off on Daytona on February 14th. After that, they're going to race at Phoenix on March the 5th. After that, they'll race at Kansas on April 18th. And then a week later, they'll race on April 25th at Talladega. After that, they'll go to Watkins Glen on May the 8th. Then they'll race at Toledo on May 16th. After that, they'll race in Michigan on June 5th, and then they'll go to Pocono Raceway on June 12th. They'll return to Pocono after being gone for at least a year or so. Then they're going to race at Berlin on June 20th, and then they're going to race at Elko on June 27th. After that, they'll race at Chicagoland on July 3rd to return to Chicagoland for the Cup, the Xfinity, and the ARCA Series for next year. Then they'll race at Lime Rock on July 11th. Then they'll race at Indianapolis Raceway Park on July 24th. Then they'll race at Iowa Speedway on August 7th. And then they'll race at Springfield on August 23rd. Then they'll race in Madison on August 28th. And then they'll race at DuQuoin on September 6th. After that, they'll race at Salem on September 12th. Then they'll race at Bristol on September 17th. And the season finale for ARCA in 2026 will be Kansas on September 25th. It's the first time Kansas will host a season finale, I believe, since 2021 or 2022. Big changes here, obviously Chicagoland and Pocono being back on the schedule. The other big thing, Toledo not being the season finale next year. Toledo moving a little bit earlier in the year to the middle of the season instead of being the finale. I think there's some decent changes for the schedule for sure. Kansas being the season finale makes a lot more sense, so it feels like a much bigger event than Toledo. Plus, you're going to have much more people tuning in. I think that was actually a good decision. Even I think Toledo could have moved maybe a little earlier in the year, but maybe not to the middle of the season. But I think having Kansas close out the season makes a ton of sense. It makes more sense than I think some of the changes we have seen in NASCAR. So I like some of the schedule changes for sure. I think it's a solid schedule. It's not a great schedule, but I think it's a solid schedule. And I do like some things about the schedule. I think it's a decent one for 2026, in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Austin Hill. Now, one of the favorites going into the 2025 season was Austin Hill to potentially have a chance and opportunity to compete for a championship. Well, Austin Hill unfortunately got eliminated in the round of 12, and he missed the round of 8 by 21 points. Breakard mentioned this on Twitter after the Xfinity Series race concluded. Austin Hill was 21 points down, right? Guess what? He had 21 playoff points before the Indianapolis road course incident. Guess how many points he lost by? 21 points. So basically, him right rear and Eric Almirola at Indianapolis Motor Speedway and getting a one-race suspension and losing all his playoff points cost Austin Hill a shot and opportunity of competing for a championship. So what happened there with Austin Hill? It bit him in the butt. Now, even if he did get a tie, he still would not have made it because Austin Hill was basically not having a lot of good runs to begin with. And the race at Bristol also cost him because they didn't run really well at Bristol. And then they had the engine issues at the Charlotte Roval. And let's be real and honest, had Austin Hill made it past the round of 12 and gotten to the round of 8, he could have absolutely been a factor to be a championship contender this year. Instead, though, he's not even making it out of the first round because he does dumb things on the racetrack. And I really hope during this offseason there is a reflection for Austin Hill because to me what happened on the track was just unacceptable on his part at Indianapolis. And I think that karma came back to bite him, unfortunately. And I think it's justified because you can't just ride somebody on the straightaway and not expect consequences. And I really hope there is a reflection in this offseason for Hill. He gets a reality check because now he's losing himself a shot at competing for a title in a championship. To me, I'm definitely not disappointed to see him gone because I think he earned the right to be eliminated, but it's interesting and it's kind of crazy he lost by that many points, which those 21 points could have been beneficial for Hill had things gone his way and not had engine issues as well during the race at the Roval. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Grant Enfinger. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series race at the Charlotte Roval, you saw some of the incidents that Grant Enfinger was involved in. He had multiple incidents throughout the race. Beginning on the first lap of the event, Grant Enfinger just completely doesn't even, I don't know what he's thinking on lap number 1 of the event. He right rears Lane Riggs, and then Lane Riggs not pile drives, but gets into Corey Heim, and they all end up crashing and wrecking on the first lap. Lane Riggs was really pissed off on the radio. Good news, though, for Corey Heim is able to go and come back from that incident and pick up the win. Thanks to caution coming out for Tony Breidinger, Brent Cruz lost the race, and Corey was able to pick up the win. But later in the race, Caden Honeycutt actually got turned by Grant Enfinger in the event, and Grant Enfinger wasn't pretty happy getting out of his truck, but Caden was also really pissed about the incident as well. It was very weird seeing Grant Enfinger, who in my opinion is generally one of the cleaner drivers in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series, just running the multiple drivers like that. It was really shocking to see. And I'll say this and give Grant Enfinger a lot of credit. He took responsibility for those incidents, so I'm not going to clown on him too much here, because to me, if you take responsibility for incidents and you at least admit that you were in the wrong for situations like that, I can't be really mad at you in that situation. I just thought the moves that he made was really shocking to see from his standpoint, because I think he knows better as a driver that you can't race like that and run into people, because it can come back to haunt you. I mean, Lane Riggs was definitely pissed off after the race too, which I don't blame him, because Lane Riggs has every right to be upset, because Lane Riggs got wrecked here, and I don't blame him for being frustrated about that situation. So I don't blame him for being upset in that case. I think Grant knows better, though. He'll probably apologize to them later. I think he did apologize to Lane for the incident that happened on the track, and I'm glad he took responsibility, because that was 100% his fault. He should take responsibility for what happened there on the track, and I'm glad to see he did, because in my opinion he's absolutely 100% in the wrong for the way he raced there, but I'm glad he at least took some responsibility and accountability for what happened on the track at the Charlotte Roval. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Fox's coverage once again from the Charlotte Roval. Now, they were actually this time, I'll give Fox a little bit of credit this time for once, they were actually at the track for the Craftsman Truck Series race at the Roval in the booth. But the coverage, like it's always been, was just as bad as it's always been so far in 2025. Jamie Little literally asked a question in the broadcast about a relief drivers. So why would you do this? Why would you bring a relief driver out to get in a truck? When I heard that question from her, and you hear Joey Logano's response to it, I think he was flabbergasted how bad that question was. I mean, he was like, they have to finish the race for the owner's points. I'm like, have you been in NASCAR for a long time, Jamie? This used to happen many times where drivers will get relief drivers. Like Richard Petty had it happen a lot of times in his career. And many other drivers throughout NASCAR did this. If you actually knew, if you watch the sport as long as you've been involved, then you probably know that that would be the case. The coverage is just not good. They weren't even paying attention to the cutoff line, and it just was really frustrating to watch, because, at least for Corey Hammond, he's locked in, but it's just, all the coverage was terrible, and the commentary sucks as well. When a big incident's happening, there's no reactions, and it's just bad. I think Fox is spiting the fans at this point by keeping her in the booth, because I've said this before, Jamie Little is a fantastic pit reporter. She is amazing at being a pit reporter, but she sucks as a lead commentator, as a play-by-play announcer. And if I was Fox, I'd be getting rid of her as quick as we could, from being the play-by-play mover to pit road, and put someone like an Eric Brennan in the booth, because the coverage continues to be awful. I'm not surprised, though, because it just has been awful. It's been atrocious. It's been bad. And we've complained about these same things over and over and over again for so many times, and Fox just isn't listening. And it's infuriating, because as a fan who watches the broadcast every single week, it gets frustrating to watch time and time again that we have to complain about the same things over and over and over again. And I really hope Fox's offseason gets a reality check and they change up who's the lead broadcaster, because to me, there needs to be a change who's at the top. And to me, I hope there is a change coming soon, because Jamie Little should not be the lead commentator for these races. She should be on pit row where she belongs, because that's where she's supposed to be, not be a lead commentator. Bring someone in more professional, and bring someone in who's going to be better as a lead commentator. I really hope that happens, because she is not that good of a lead commentator. Hope that changes really, really soon. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Riley Herbst versus Kyle Busch. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race yesterday at the Charlotte Roval, Riley Herbst and Kyle Busch had some controversy and some contact during the race. So late in this event, at the beginning of stage number 3, Kyle Busch was already 8 or 9 laps down in this race due to the fact that Carson Osbar wrecked him on the first lap in the first corner of the event, and Kyle Busch went to the garage with a ton of damage. Riley Herbst and Kyle had a little bit of contact, and Kyle Busch was just frustrated at everything going on, and he would end up wrecking Riley Herbst, and Riley Herbst ended up spinning out. Now, Riley Herbst, we'll talk about his disqualification here in a little bit, but Riley Herbst basically went on the radio and said that Kyle Busch should just probably retire at this point. Now, when I heard those comments from Riley Herbst, I said something on social media, and I have to say it here. Riley, the person who probably should be retiring at this point is you. You've had one top 15 finish in the Cup Series so far this year. Your best finish is 14th. I believe you're the only driver that's full-time in Cup competition that doesn't have a single top 10 finish so far this year. In fact, you're only beating one driver in the full-time points. That is Cody Ware, who at points has even looked better at you on the racetrack. You ran horrendous all year. You've had like 4 top 20 finishes all season long. So if there's someone that probably needs to be retiring from a Cup ride, it is you. I get the Cup Series for rookies is difficult, but to go on the radio and say that about, I get Kyle Busch has had a bad season, but to just try to dogpile Kyle Busch like that because you've been having an horrendous day to begin with. You tried to wreck Ty Dillon and retaliate under caution, and you cut your own tire down. I think it's just funny how bad Riley Herbst has been. I mean, think about this. Corey Heim has had more top 15 finishes. In fact, Corey Heim has a top 10. Riley Herbst doesn't have a top 10 so far this season. So if anyone should probably retire at this point, it probably should be Riley Herbst. But Riley Herbst is going to keep that right for a few more years. I really hope he improves because I want to see him improve. But at this point, just going and saying that stuff, like he said, was really infuriating to hear because to me, he should know better than to say stuff like that on the radio. He should be a better driver than that. But I'm not surprised because Riley Herbst doesn't take accountability sometimes. And to me, he should take accountability for what happened there. Again, Kyle Busch was at fault for wrecking him, sure. But Riley had a bad day overall as it is. And to say that Kyle Busch should retire, I thought that was kind of uncalled for on Riley Herbst's part, and I think the retirement comments are unnecessary considering Kyle Busch will be a Hall of Famer and has still been more competitive and even in bad seasons have more top 5s and more top 10s than you've had. And your teammates, by the way, made the round of 12 and both have won. Well, one of them has won a race, and one's been more competitive, and both have been more competitive than you. So if you want to talk about retirement at this point, you should probably retire of how bad you've been so far this season. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Charlotte Rumble once again. We're going to talk about the finish and the controversy at the end of this race. So let's set the scene. Coming into this race, Ross Chastain had already had multiple issues on pit road. He basically missed coming out of pit road, went driving straight across. I guess he thought we were still on the Charlotte Oval. And then late in the race after covering, he got a speeding penalty. While Joey Logano's team knew that his car was not that good on the long run, that being Joey, they came down pit road late in this race to try to get fresh tires with 10 laps to go. And Logano would try to start charging his way up there. Meanwhile, Ross Chastain was on the defense, and he had a bunch of guys on fresh tires that were closing in. Coming to white flag of the event, Ross Chastain was 1 or 2 points ahead of Joey Logano at that point. But Denny Hamlin, not knowing the point situation at that time, would pass Ross after completely missing the corner, and he would basically lose his chance to go in. Ross would try to do what he's done and would try to pull another Hail Melon move. It would just dump Denny Hamlin going in the final corner of the event, and Joey Logano goes by, and Ross misses by 4 or 5 points, and Joey Logano makes it to the next round. When I saw that move happen on the racetrack, I was not very happy. And I see people that were like going crazy in the stands, the fans that were actually at the stands, because the crowd did not look good at the Roval. But the fans that were there were going wild and crazy from what I had heard. But when I saw that move, and I think you go on social media, many fans were really frustrated about that move right there. Because if Ross Chastain would have gotten in and made it in with that move, a lot of fans would have definitely been furious. And I think NASCAR would have had to take a look at it. And I think NASCAR would not have let Ross Chastain, would have been disallowed from going to the next round if he made a move like that. And we've seen it. The precedent was set with Austin Dillon, right? When Austin Dillon intentionally wrecked Joey Logano and Denny Hamlin. And he didn't get to make the playoffs because of that. And I still stand by that was the right call. But I think for that move right there, that's just a reflection on the system. And I said this last night, but I'm not entertained by stuff like that. Joey Logano can say all he wants, and Logano's going to defend the system no matter what, right? But Joey Logano can say all he wants about you don't have storylines and drama like that. What do we talk about? Shane Van Gisbergen dominating? Guess what? I'd rather be talking about the fact that Shane Van Gisbergen dominated another road course race, put together a phenomenal run. Does that create storylines? I'd rather be talking about a great battle between Kyle Larson, Christopher Bell, and SVG for a few laps there. An amazing battle there at points throughout the race. I would like to be talking about some good runs from people like Michael McDowell and AJ Allmendinger. They did not get an interview after the race. Go back to the Xfinity race yesterday. Austin Green finished second. Took them 30 minutes to interview the guy who finished runner-up. I don't care about all this playoff crap. That's why I've said we need to go back to full season championship, because we've seen this too many times where wrecks happen, where people intentionally wreck each other, and chaos ends up happening. And I'm with Brad Keselowski on this one. It's manufactured drama. It's nonsense. It's bull crap. And I'm just sick of this system. It's frustrating to watch as a fan. And I really hope these changes come. I hope we go back to full season. We've been talking about going back to full season. If they don't go back to full season after all the talk, I think it's going to be awful. And I really hope they go back to full season because I'm tired of stuff like this. It's frustrating to watch. And it's infuriating to watch as a fan. And I'm not a fan of this kind of stuff that we've been seeing on the racetrack. It's too much for me. Not a fan of it. And I'm not a fan of the controversial finish from yesterday. It was a bad look for the sport and a bad reflection of where the sport is at currently at this moment. Not a big fan of it. Sorry, not a fan of stuff like that happening on the racetrack. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Carson Quaffle. Now, it was announced about a week or so ago that it was announced Rodney Childers will be the crew chief of the number 1 car for Junior Motorsports in 2025 to be split between Carson Quaffle and Connor Zilisch. This means that Carson Quaffle at this moment right now will not be full-time in the NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series in 2026. Now, according to Bob Pockrass did report speaking to Carson Quaffle, he's still trying to find the funding for the remainder of the 2026 season. We also know Dale Jr. is likely going to help Carson try to find funding so he can run full-time next year. But Dale Jr. mentioned on Dale Jr. Download, I think it was on Tuesday, that the reason he's not full-time is because funding was a big reason for that. That's what I had heard about a week or so ago as well, that was a big reason why Carson at the moment is not full-time. But Bob Pockrass does expect that Carson will run 2/3 of the season with Junior Motorsports in 2026. So most likely Carson, if he does get the funding, which means of the 33 races, Carson is at this moment likely run 22 or 23 of the 33 races. Now, could Carson Quaffle end up driving maybe some of those races in the 88 car? That is a possibility. There's rumors the 88 will not be full-time also in 2026. We've heard rumors of people like Corey Day and Raja Karif and Daniel Suarez mentioned for that ride for next year. They've all been linked over there. We've heard Parker Kligerman's name mentioned as well recently too, being a candidate for the number 88, at least on a part-time stint. Could Carson run the rest of those races in that car? It is certainly a possibility if he can find the funding in sponsorship. But I really hope for his sake he can find the funding because Carson absolutely deserves to be racing in the series full-time. He's way too talented to not be full-time. I do get that funding is so important in the sport, right? That it's a major important thing they need to have is funding. But I really hope there is a way they can find a way for him to be full-time next year because he's way too talented to not be full-time. And it's a shame that because of funding, because they had to pay Rodney Childers a lot of money to persuade him to come over and run Xfinity. But I also think next year, he's going to win next year in O'Reilly Auto Parts Series, Carson is, because he's got Rodney Childers as the crew chief, and Rodney Childers is really good at setting up cars and setting up equipment. He knows what he's doing as a crew chief, and I think he's going to do a phenomenal and really good job as a crew chief next year, and I expect good things. Expect good things from Rodney Childers being up there on the box next year. Again, we don't know exactly the full schedule, but like I mentioned, 2/3 of the schedule is likely to be run for Carson. Could he run for a good team? If Penske brings back their program, could it be part-time? I don't know if a manufacturer would like to have a driver run in 2 different manufacturers. So could that be something to watch for? And it could be something to watch for as well at this moment right now. But to me, I really hope Carson, like I said, gets the funding so he can run the rest of the season with JRM in that number 88 car next year, or maybe the 9 car at this point, because we don't know exactly if that 9 will come back in 2026. But it's a shame that JRM, after how dominant they've been, they're not going to have 4 full-time cars. It doesn't make sense either at this point to me. With how dominant they've been, why wouldn't you run at least 3 full-time cars and not have a couple extra all-star cars? That would be the most sensible thing you can do. We'll have to kind of wait and see what happens, though, with Junior Motorsports program for next year. We obviously know Sam Youssef and Justin Allgaier are confirmed to be back next year as they sign extensions with the team. We'll have to wait and see, though, what happens with the remainder of the lineup for the program and the organization. We'll see how things go and see how things work out for the 2026 season for Carson. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Bubba Wallace and Denny Hamlin. Now, if you watched the end of the NASCAR Cup Series race at Kansas about a week or so ago, you saw the controversial moment that took place at the end. Denny Hamlin would go way wide into the corner, miss the corner completely, and run Bubba Wallace up in the outside wall. Now, to go backstory, Denny Hamlin did not have power steering at that point of the event, and Bubba got in the outside wall, and Chase Elliott got by both of them at the end and took the race lead and ended up picking up a second win of 2025, in his 21st career NASCAR Cup Series win. Now, they both spoke about the incident that took place at Kansas Speedway. According to what Bubba Wallace mentioned, Bubba was definitely not very happy about what happened on the racetrack there and was pissed off about the fact that they let a Chevrolet get the win. They basically, according to what Bubba said too, they only spoke 30 minutes prior to the interviews taking place and all the media questions taking place. They were really, really shocked that it took so long. For a lot of people were surprised how long it took for them to have conversations, considering Denny Hamlin is the owner of the organization, and Bubba Wallace, of course, drives for 2311 Racing. Denny Hamlin also spoke to the media as well, and Denny Hamlin understands Bubba Wallace's frustration in that situation, but he also said he was a little bit surprised to see that Bubba Wallace was that upset for so long about what happened on the racetrack right there. He was surprised that Bubba was as frustrated as it was. Which for Denny Hamlin, I think you have to look at the approach. Bubba Wallace knows that he has to win that race to make it, because while Bubba has gotten better at road courses, he knew that he needed to go out there and likely pick up the win in victory at that race at Kansas, which he probably would have won the race if not for making some of the moves that happened there at the end. For Denny Hamlin, and I do understand Denny Hamlin's frustration, but I have to agree with something that Dale Jarrett said about not apologizing. I do like the title of the podcast, and I thought the podcast was a really good listen, but I think Dale Jarrett brought this up during the race and before the green flag drop. I think Denny Hamlin should have apologized to Bubba Wallace about what he did. Apologize it because Denny Hamlin says, I regret some of the moves that I made in that situation, but I think he could have at least apologized for Bubba for putting him in the outside wall. I get that Denny Hamlin is going for the win in that situation. I don't think Denny Hamlin entirely necessarily did anything wrong in that incident on the track. But that doesn't mean Bubba Wallace doesn't have a right to be upset. He has a right to be frustrated and upset in that situation because he felt he got wrong in that situation that happened on the track. And I can't blame Bubba for being upset right there because Bubba, again, was in a very good position to go to the next round with the victory. He would have been in the next round. Hell, it would have eliminated Joey Logano from making it in. Do you want the Joey Logano to be in the round of 8, how good he's at some of the tracks coming up? I don't think so. So for Denny, he didn't see the bigger picture fully in my opinion, at Kansas fully. And then I don't think he saw the bigger picture at the Charlotte Roll in the situation by passing Ross there. Though Ross made a mistake and it gave Denny the opportunity to make the move. But I digress. But at this point there, I think that there's things that could have been done in all situations right there. And to me, I think some moves were made, and I think some people just made bad moves and bad judgments on the racetrack. And to me, in this case and situation, I think for Bubba Wallace, I understand the frustration. I'm glad they spoke about it. Seems like they're on good terms after the incident. Now they can fully focus forward, try to end the season on a good note, and try to get built up some momentum. Remainder of the year, maybe Bubba will get a win for the end of the year. Who knows? We'll see how things go at Vegas, and we'll see if they can both bring some really strong performances for the end of this season. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Riley Herbst once again. Now, I did a video breaking this down yesterday and last night on the channel, but it was announced last night after the Cup Series race concluded at the Charlotte Roval that we did have another disqualification, as it was announced that Riley Herbst was disqualified from the NASCAR Cup Series race at the Charlotte Roval. The reason Riley Herbst was disqualified was because he failed post-race weights and didn't have enough weight in the car. Maybe had too much weight, but I believe he didn't have enough weight in the car and got disqualified because of that. Now, Riley Herbst already didn't have a good finish as it is. He was originally credited with the 29th place finish, but everybody behind him would jump up positions. Eric Jones moved up a spot. Kyle Busch moved up a spot. I believe Todd Gillen may have moved up a spot, but I can't remember exactly. Josh Walicki moved up a spot, and Austin Cindric could follow the race early. He also moved up a spot as well at the end of the event, after Cindric got taken out by Carson Hocevar in that race. It was just a no-good bad day for Riley Herbst. Obviously, we talked about the fact that he got into an incident with Ty Dillon early in the race, and the two silver spoons, some would call, would get into it. And basically, like I mentioned, Riley Herbst cut a tire down. Then, of course, you had the incident there with Kyle Busch, where Riley basically told that Kyle Busch should retire at this point. And now you have Riley Herbst being disqualified. It's been a little bit since we've seen a disqualification in the Cup Series this year, but I do believe we've had the record for most disqualifications, maybe ever in a single season, I'm pretty sure, because we've seen, and really in the last year, because last year Alex Bowman got disqualified at the Charlotte Roval, which gave Joey Logano a chance and opportunity. At least this time around, we don't have an effect on the outcome of the whole entire championship, because had it been like a championship contender, it could have been crazy if like it reverse happened where Joey Logano got eliminated and Ross Chastain would have got him. That would have been wilder in that case. But we've seen a lot of drivers get disqualified this year. Lane Riggs, who finished second in the truck race at Kansas, he got disqualified. We've seen the winners multiple times get disqualified, Park Clearman and Jesse Love. In the last year, we've seen Corey Heim get disqualified at Charlotte for lug nuts. We've seen Matt Benedetto get disqualified for the same thing. We've seen, of course, the craziness at Pocono where Kyle Busch and Denny Hamlin were both disqualified from that race. And then you think about other drivers who have been disqualified in recent years, and it's Sammy Smith who got benefited from disqualification. Jesse Love, he gets disqualified a couple weeks later at Charlotte Over after getting a top 10 finish. Justin Bonzanor got disqualified earlier this year. We have seen a lot this year, and in the last couple of years, Brad Keselowski got disqualified at Martinsville in 2022. Kevin Harvick, who technically finished second at Talladega, had he won the race, he would have been disqualified and wouldn't have basically given the win to Ryan Blaney no matter what. Speaking of which, Ryan Blaney a couple of years ago in 23 originally got disqualified, and in this qualification got rescinded in that case. We've seen so many disqualifications so far in the NASCAR Cup Series, and it's kind of crazy that we've been seeing more and more as time has gone on. Is teams pushing the boundaries, is teams pushing it to the edge and trying to find any edge and curve as possible to get as big of an advantage as they can to try to find a curve and make the best speed that they can on a week-by-week basis. But it's been crazy to see so many disqualifications in Cup this year. Obviously, this doesn't have a full bearing on the championship, but it's kind of crazy how many disqualifications there have been in the Cup Series. Oh, I forgot Joey Logano and Ryan Preece both got disqualified at Talladega. So we continue having more, and I think there's going to be more. We could see some at Vegas. Who knows at this point? We continue seeing a ton of disqualifications in the NASCAR Cup Series. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, over the weekend, Kyle Busch is speaking about the fact that Randall Burnett is no longer the crew chief for Kyle Busch for the remainder of 2025. Kyle Busch spoke to the media and said that there had to be some changes that were made, and he says that Rich Schultz Racing is pretty confident in Kyle Busch, and he's like, okay, they're confident that I can get the job done. That's why they went ahead and made the crew chief change. Obviously, of course, Randall Burnett will not be back with Rich Schultz Racing at the end of the 2025, as of course he'll be going to work with Connor Zilisch in Trackhouse Racing starting in the 2026 season. It was also confirmed that Andy Street will be the crew chief for the remainder of 2025 as well. Now, Kyle Busch did not comment on exactly who the crew chief will be for RCR in 2026. It could potentially be Andy Street, who's, again, this could be a little bit very similar to what happened with like Robbie Loomis and what happened when Steve Letarte came in for the remainder of 2025 and when we're working with Jeff Gordon, and then of course Steve would take over the crew chiefing duties full time in 2026. I think that is certainly a possibility, and we could definitely see something like that for sure going into next year. I think Kyle Busch definitely needed a new fresh start. Again, I will say, though, I don't think Randall Burnett was the problem at Richard Schultz Racing. I think Kyle Busch is definitely part of the problem over there, and I think that you saw some of the performance issues. Now, granted, what happened at the Charlotte Roval this past weekend is not all on Kyle Busch. Some of that's on Carson Hocevar, who wrecked him, and Kyle Busch still was getting multiple laps back and finished like 8 or 9 laps down. But Kyle Busch, I think, is ready for a new season at this point. It's been a really bad year for the number 8 team. Outside of a really good run at COTA and some decent runs earlier in the year, it's been generally a really frustrating season for the number 8 team. They just haven't brought the consistent performance and speed, and they're not bringing really good race cars on the racetrack. Kyle Busch is sitting like 22nd or 23rd in the full season points. It has just not been a good year for the number 8 team currently at the moment, and Kyle Busch is having his statistical worst season in his NASCAR Cup Series career. But now we talk a little bit about the future, and that is going past 2026, because next year for Kyle Busch is going to be a contract year at Richard Childress Racing. He did say they signed a contract extension with him for 2026. But going into 2027, there are going to be a lot of rides that are going to be available for Kyle Busch, because I don't think Kyle Busch is going to stay at RCR past the 2026 season. I just don't see the 8 team really performing extremely well going into next year. And I think there's a very realistic possibility that Kyle Busch will not be back with RCR past 2026. So where could Kyle Busch end up in 2027? I think 2311 could be an option for Kyle Busch going into net 27, because there could be a ride available over there. Bubba Wallace has not signed a contract extension past 2026, but I think Bubba's likely going to extend. I think 2311 would be a really good option to go over and replace Riley Hurts, but you've got Corey Heim right there, so that might not be on the table. Some mention going over and taking over the 48 car. I would actually take Alex Bowman over Kyle Busch right now, because I think Bowman has a better higher ceiling right now at the moment than Kyle Busch does. I think the most likely option for Kyle Busch going into 27 is actually going to be the 7 car for Spire Motorsports. It's unknown who's going to be in that 7 car at the moment for 2026. We are expecting that Justin Haley likely will not be back in that car next year, from what a lot of people are saying, and many think that Daniel Suarez is going to be in there for 1 year. I don't think Daniel Suarez, though, is going to move the needle that much, so I think Kyle Busch will be over in the 7. Here's why I think he goes to Spire. Spire Motorsports is ascending. They're starting to show a lot of really good speed. They're getting a lot faster cars. They're starting to get better. They've had a better year this year than prior seasons. And they've had race-winning speed from time to time, not just from Carson Osbar, but there's been a few times this year where that number 71 car of Michael McDowell, who could retire at the end of next year, by the way, that could also be an option going over to 71 and working with Travis Mack, or whoever the crew chief is of that number 71, Travis Peterson, excuse me. I think that is certainly an option for Kyle Busch. I think that Spire, plus he has a working relationship with them. He works with their Truck Series program. Of course, Spire's truck team was bought, Kyle Busch Motorsports team got bought by Spire Motorsports, the truck operation, and the truck shop also got bought there as well. I think this is the most likely spot for Kyle Busch. I think Spire is certainly interested in him, from what Bob Pockers mentioned, and I think that is likely going to be where he ends up in 2027. I just think that's the most likely logical landing spot for Kyle Busch. I do not expect Kyle Busch, though, of course, to go over there in 26. Some thought maybe he could go there a year early. They're going to honor the contract. Kyle's going to stay for 1 more year, but I think at this point, for Kyle Busch fans, they're just looking for some hope at this point. They're looking for Kyle Busch to find a way to get his career back up and running and just fix his career at this point. And I think the best likely option, like I said, is going over and driving a Spire Motorsports Cup car in 2027. I think that's the most likely option, because I don't see Joe Gibbs Racing being an option for 27. I think all 4 drivers under contract are 2027 at this point. So I think the most likely option is going to be a Spire car. So I think that's where he goes next in 27. I think that's where Kyle Busch ends up. I think that's where they're going to put him in. I think he ends up over in the Spire program and drives for them. I think that's where he'll go in 2027. The race in the NASCAR Cup Series is with the Spire Motorsports team and Spire organization. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode, as we're talking about the 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports lawsuit once again. As we got a pretty big update over the weekend. As it was announced on Friday going into Saturday, the NASCAR has filed their summary judgment motion against 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports. NASCAR pretty much said a lot of very similar things they have said throughout this, that 2311 and the Sherman Act doesn't really come into play with some of the claims they were trying to make from 2016 to 2019 with the ISC acquisition. And what they are wanting is Judge Kenneth Bell to rule on the lawsuit before the whole entire lawsuit goes through. Now, 2011 and Front Row are also expecting to have theirs go through relatively soon, and they're expecting to hope to have a ruling come very soon, even before the trial ends up taking place. That is not surprising. We don't expect the settlement to come from that. Where settlement now could potentially be in play is from what a lot of team owners have said. Many team owners in the NASCAR Cup Series, I believe 9 team owners as a matter of fact, are now in support of the charter system altogether, and they are basically wanting a settlement done at this point. Among the owners that signed the declarations was Richard Childress, who, funny enough, called NASCAR communist regime, Roger Penske, Rick Hendrick, Brad Keselowski, Gordon Smith from Hayek Motorsports, Carl Long. Also, I believe B.J. McLeod signed a declaration as well. I believe there are a couple other. Joe Gibbs signed a declaration, which is interesting considering one of his drivers is involved in this lawsuit in a really big way. And many other owners signed it. Now, it was noted that Jeff Dickerson from Spire Motorsports, Justin Marks from Trackhouse Racing, and Matt Collig and Collig were the 3 organizations that did not sign a declaration that, of course, are not suing NASCAR at this point right now. What these declarations are saying, they're urging NASCAR and 2311 Racing and Front Row Motorsports to basically settle. What's going on here is that they are worried and they are afraid of what could happen. Because if 2311 and Front Row, in fact, do win the lawsuit, there is actually a possibility, and Judge Kenneth Bell did mention this during some of the stuff that's been going on. He did mention that there is a possibility that the charter system altogether could be wiped up and thrown away altogether. And the team owners and the teams that signed the charter agreement for 2026 or 25, they don't want that to happen. And they're worried that 2311 Front Row could get new benefits that could really benefit those organizations and not benefit the other organizations. And there could be a lot of things that come into play. Now, also, of course, there were some responses that did come out as well from this. Denny Hamlin basically put out a response about the charter system, which, by the way, put something out there, and Jeffrey Kessler said this, and is a very important point. 23XI Racing and Spire Motorsports and have never said that they want to get rid of the charter system. That's not what they're going after at this point. They said the charter system is important. That's why they have fought for charters throughout this year, and that's something that is very important to note, is that they have wanted to keep the charters around. They don't want to get rid of the charter system altogether. What they want is it wants to benefit the teams in the competition side of things. Now, outside of the permanent charters, it is really difficult to see exactly what 23XI and Spire Motorsports wants. They haven't really made that completely clear, and that's something that could hurt 23XI in front row if it does get to that point. Now, could Judge Kenneth Bell rule on these summary judgments? It is possible. But 23XI front row, the lawyer for them, Jeffrey Kessler, has basically said that he basically wants them to basically rule on this. And I don't think that this is going to have any bearing, and it really isn't going to have full effect on the whole lawsuit as a whole. It is very clear as day that many of the team owners do want this lawsuit to come to a close, and they want this end, and they're urging them to go ahead and settle at this point because they're worried and they're afraid that stuff could really hit the fan if they do in fact go to the whole trial in general. And they also, depending on what happens with the lawsuit, because let's just say this, if 23XI front row, they lose the lawsuit, nothing is going to change. Basically, outside of the fact that 23XI front row more than likely are not going to exist in NASCAR. Now, they could file a countersuit, which NASCAR, I believe, has filed a countersuit for 2026 if they do lose. But if NASCAR loses, a lot of things could really change. They could be forced to give up ISC. They could be forced to sell off all the tracks in the track holding company that they own at this point. They could be forced to sell ARCA. That is actually a possibility. They could be forced to sell ARCA and maybe even sell IMSA as well, which could really have a negative effect on IMSA. It could also be forced to get rid of the charter agreement. But if they are forced to get rid of the charter agreement, there's a very good possibility that a lot of these teams could end up shutting down. We probably wouldn't have as many competitive teams in the sport if not for the charter system. I do get that a lot of fans are not fans of the charter system. And when the charter system was created initially back in 2016, I'll be real, I wasn't the biggest fan of the charter system. But now, if you get rid of the charter system, 9 years into it, going into 10 years into this system, there is going to be a lot of things that are going to happen and a lot of negative effects that are going to take place. And a lot of bad things in general are going to happen if the charter system is completely ripped up and thrown away altogether. I don't think people realize the repercussions that are going to happen if the charter system is gone. I just hope that there is some smart decisions made here, and if Judge Kenneth Bell does rule in favor of those organizations, because again, 23XI front row, they don't want to get rid of the charter system. Now, the judge can rule that it's anti-competitive, antitrust, all that, but I think get rid of the charter system because a lot of drivers also in their contracts, they have charter clauses. I believe majority of the Cup Series drivers have charter clauses. I think Larson does. I know Hamlin does for sure. I believe Chastain, Shane Gisborg, I think, has one as well. Majority of the Cup drivers, they have it. But judging by some of the things, now some of the things I read throughout this whole thing as well, like Brad Keselowski talk about the SRX, competing in the SRX, NASCAR not bar him. I think there's a clear difference from that, Brad, in the final year, considering the SRX was running at Thursday nights in the final year, and of course Cup Series races were happening on Saturdays and Sundays. So that's something I think goes against some of the things that RFK mentioned. But it's certainly interesting for sure. Again, Eric Eset brought this up on his channel. He basically said that I think the team owners are afraid, and I completely agree. I think they're afraid about the consequences that really could come into play if things happen and certain things happen in the suit. It's going to be interesting to see what happens, though, with the summary judgment. We'll be paying attention to the rest of this as time goes on. I think a lot more is going to come out, and I think it's going to heat up as we get closer. I think the team owners are finally starting to feel it. We're less than 2 months away from the trial at this point. We'll see how it goes on December 1st, and throughout the rest of the lawsuit, we'll see how things happen, and we'll see how things progress throughout the remainder of the lawsuit going forward into the future. So that's good for today's Law NASCAR News and Motorsports News episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let's go below that and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. You think Judge Kenneth Bell will throw out the summary judgment? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And where do you think Kyle Busch goes in the future? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If any other major news breaks later today, we'll discuss it live on the channel. Tomorrow we're going to be talking, of course, about who I think will make the championship for all 3 series. That video will be being released tomorrow. Then on Wednesday we'll have a NASCAR news video more than likely. Then Thursday, and of course Xfinity race picks. Then Thursday we'll have Cup race picks for the race at Vegas, and we'll also have maybe paint schemes coming out as well that might be coming back this week. And then on Friday we should have a NASCAR news video dropping on the channel. And then Saturday we'll be doing some sort of video early in the morning, maybe a silly season update before all the cars get on track. And other things as well. We got a lot of content coming on people like Haley Deegan, Shane Van Gisbergen, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Busch, Bubba Wallace, Ross Chastain, Sheldon Creed, Sam Mayer, Frankie Muniz, Joey Logano, Clayton Zafron, Dodge Ram, Will O'Brien, Brock Feeney, Cam Waters, Eric on roll, all the good stuff. We'll talk about the channel in the coming days and coming weeks as well, along with Connor Zos, Junior Motorsports 2, and Daniel Suarez. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode. I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.